So good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Book Club of California's online program titled The Material Culture of Advertising, Treasures from the Winterthur Library's Collection of Trade Literature. And thank you so much for joining us for this Book Club of California presentation tonight. My name is Kevin Kosick, and I'm the Executive Director of the Book Club of California. And it's my pleasure to welcome you and host the webinar this evening. For those of you that might be new to the Book Club of California, the Book Club of California is a nonprofit member and donor supported organization that is dedicated to preserving and promoting the history of the book and the book arts. Oftentimes we do that with a focus on the literature and the history of California and the West. The book club publishes limited edition finely made books, a scholarly journal, and keepsakes. We host a year-round series of exhibitions and programs like the one this evening on topics including fine printing, design, typography, bookbinding, collecting, California history, and much, much more. Now, if you're not a member of the book club or if your membership has lapsed and you're interested in what we do, please consider joining our century-long tradition. Our membership dues are modest and the benefits are many. We simply can't do the work of the book club without the support of our members. So I encourage you to visit us online at bccbooks.org to join, to donate, or to just find out more about the Book Club of California. Okay, and now for tonight's program and our presenter. The program is titled The Material Culture of Advertising, Treasures from the Winterthur Library's Collection of Trade Literature. And our presenter is Alexandra Alvis. I might call you Allie. Is that okay?
Perfect.
I didn't check beforehand. I might call you Allie. But Alexandra Alvis is a book historian and curator of special collections at Winterthur Museum, Garden, and Library. Born and raised in Wichita, Kansas, of all places, Allie obtained an undergraduate degree in linguistics from the University of Kansas. They then moved to Edinburgh, Scotland, to pursue a Master's of Science in Book History at the University of Edinburgh. After graduating with merit from there, they undertook an additional Master's of Science at the University of Glasgow in Information Management. From there, Allie took a position as a library technician and then later promoted to reference librarian in the Smithsonian Libraries and Archives Special Collections. And then, as a rare book cataloger at antiquarian book dealer Type Punch Matrix. Now, Allie has written numerous articles and lectured at many conferences and taught many classes on book history and about the book as a cultural object. Tonight, Allie is going to talk about the dynamic nature of trade material, the cards, the catalogs, the advertising ephemera, the sales samples, and more that were used as promotional tools, but they also found their way into the hands of 19th century scrapbookers and are now used as valuable tools for research and creative inspiration. Now, Allie will take us all on, I think, a journey through 400 years of advertising and promotion in America and Europe, highlighting some of the wonderful, and as she noted, sometimes weird, trade treasures from the Winterthur Library's collection. In terms of logistics tonight, we will have a lecture, a program, and that will include this presentation that you're seeing, and then we'll have a Q&A session. Now, if you have any questions or comments for our presenter or about the presentation itself, you can use the chat and the Q&A functions in Zoom. We should have time towards the end of the hour to take questions, and we'll curate those from both the chat and the Q&A. Now, it's my great pleasure to introduce our speaker, Alexandra Alvis. Take it away, Allie.
Thank you so much, Kevin. And thank you again for inviting me to present to your wonderful club and to all 106 people watching online. So I will get right to it because we have 400 years of history to cover. Before Amazon, before big box stores, and even before mailboxes sagged under the weight of colorful catalogs in the mid-20th century, customers and shop owners alike turned to a wide variety of media to select their purchases and to aspire to grander lifestyles. This category of material is usually called trade literature, and it fits under the umbrella of ephemera, material that was, in contrast to things like books, not meant to stick around for a long time. It is also one of the collecting strengths of the Winterthur Library, located just outside Wilmington, Delaware, where, as Kevin mentioned, I am curator of special collections. But our world-class collection of trade literature did not start with me. I stand on the shoulders of very forward-thinking giants who realized that this material was not just a historic record of capitalism, but of the everyday lives of Americans of all classes. Good advertising is not just a list of products for sale. It is a pitch, a dynamic appeal to emotion and taste, and varies in distinct ways throughout the centuries, which tells us a lot about the audience it is targeting. Despite historic changes in the art of sales, the visual nature of many examples of trade literature means that it is not just a valuable research tool, but a place of inspiration for artists. But why do we have so much of it at Winterthur? In the next 45 minutes or so, I'll take you on a whirlwind tour of the development of trade literature, whisk you through the development of the Winterthur Library, and highlight a few of my favorite pieces in the collection. Today, in the internet and social media heavy cultural milieu, we think of self-promotion almost as a basic human instinct. And indeed, people have been advertising their services and wares since almost the dawn of time. One of the earliest surviving examples is an Egyptian weaver promoting his wares. And Pompeii graffiti is replete with ads promoting the services of those practicing the most venerable profession. Starting in the Middle Ages, even paper, which was slowly but surely supplanting parchment as the writing medium of choice in Europe, carried an almost invisible advertisement, a watermark indicating the mill where the paper was produced. Italian papermaker Fabriano, in business for over 800 years now, notes that they began to use these watermarks in 1293 as a guarantee of uniqueness, quality, and authenticity. A way to say, hey, if you want good paper like this, buy it from us, not those other guys. Paper has long been a key element of trade literature, particularly in its ability to be clearly printed on. The rise of the printing press in the West didn't just serve to diffuse knowledge in a revolutionary way. It allowed individuals and businesses to advertise their goods to much wider audiences and with much more detail than before. It also meant that by the 17th century, these advertisements had become relatively cheap to produce, particularly in the pages of a newfangled type of media called a newspaper. In the 1670s, businesses were beginning to experiment with distributing handbills containing price lists and the earliest form of trade cards, purpose-printed advertisements on single pieces of standard weight paper. At the time, this was seen as a dangerous practice, and some railed against the idea of adding to the unnecessary expense of commissioning printed ads to their overhead. The material record tells us which of these strategies worked out in the end. The 18th century saw an explosion of standalone advertising, particularly in the refinement and production of trade cards, which began to shrink to true card size and be printed on heavier weight paper, of which there are many thousands of examples in special collections libraries the world over. Trade cards are exactly what they sound like. Smallish advertisements for people plying their trade, describing businesses, products, and labor. These cards became more visually complex as the format developed, and the word card can contain multitudes, particularly once you get to the 19th century. Originally called tradesmen's cards, the earliest trade cards featured woodcut illustrations, such as this one for a Gateshead tea warehouse, which I think is ripe for the memeing. I just haven't thought up a good enough post for it. But as the art of illustrative engraving gained popularity, businesses embraced it. The need to catch the eye of a potential customer was always a consideration, as was the need to tell people where to buy the stuff that was being advertised. Many trade cards depict the facade of the building where the shop or business was based, as well as a detailed description of how to get there, a necessity before numbering of addresses became standardized. Other design elements followed the tastes of the time, with spiky Rococo cartouches and classical figures. To add another layer of prestige to how they represented themselves, businesses commissioned prominent engravers to design their trade cards, including William Hogarth, Thomas Buick, and Paul Revere. And these engravers, of course, didn't waste the opportunity to get in a bit of advertising of their own. As trade cards developed as sales methods, so too did trade catalogs. Though the term trade catalog technically refers to a publication or manuscript circulated specifically from manufacturers to retailers, I will be using it as defined by Richard McKinstry. Just about any separately existing advertisement issued by any person or firm that wants to sell something. Like their trade card cousins, trade catalogs greatly benefited from the growth of the engraving industry, particularly due to the trust inherent to placing an order based on an illustration. What the customer receives better be pretty darn close to what they saw, or you're going to be accused of being a crook. Thomas Chippendale's The Gentleman and Cabinet Maker's Director, published in 1754, is often cited as one of the earliest true trade catalogs, although it lacks the ephemeral quality that would later become the calling card of such publications. This isn't just a book, it is a substantial book. Oop, that's not supposed to have sound. Other early examples include the 1780s catalogs for metal fittings from Birmingham, England. You hear the crunch of the paper there. Notably, these catalogs do not identify the name of the manufacturer of this array of material, from hinges to highly ornate claw feet. And in fact, many of the designs were reused across different catalogs produced by different businesses. I guess we're going to get more sound here. But not all trade catalogs were illustrated. This very early American trade catalog, published in 1760 by the Loyalist printer and bookseller James Rivington, is simply a straightforward list of titles. Perhaps the antithesis of the Rivington catalog is a subcategory of trade literature that is near and dear to my heart, the sales sample book. Sometimes an engraving, no matter how fine, just can't accurately capture the je ne sais quoi of a product. So why not just show the customer the product itself? Obviously, this approach only worked for certain trades. You obviously couldn't fit a miniature Chippendale highboy in a book. But you can get pretty close. From wood veneers to woven textiles to pen nibs, these sales samples appealed to retail buyers as well as private customers. These samples were particularly important when selling things like paint or wallpaper, where it is very important to depict colors accurately. The world of trade literature underwent a seismic shift with the development of chromolithography, where in the past, illustrations had to be colored by hand, printed with limited colors at high cost, or simply include samples of the material advertised. Chromolithography upped the detail and quality and lowered the cost of production. Chromolithographs are created using multiple flat stones to print parts of illustrations. You can see an array here of all of the different colors that are layered together to create this color image of a woman dyeing cloth with diamond dyes. When the colors are layered, they combine into a spectrum of colors that had never been produced outside of handwork, making them extremely appealing to customers. When chromolithography hit the trade literature scene in the mid-19th century, it kicked off somewhat of an advertising arms race, with businesses producing ever more vibrant, complex promotions for their wares. Customers were thrilled with the profusion of colorful and beautiful paper items, and understandably, began to collect and save them, both as home decor and to place in scrapbooks. I find these ads for, it's a grocer, but for some reason they have selected this card of a large bee chasing children because why not? You often see this in advertisements of this period where the actual image is a complete non sequitur. It's purely for people who are collecting this stuff and just sort of will find it amusing, and therefore the business name will stick in the mind. It is no small part thanks to intrepid collectors and scrapbookers that so much Victorian advertising ephemera survives today. It is, of course, also thanks to the fact that more advertising material than ever, by a wide margin, was being produced in this period, helped along by an efficient mailing system and the general popularity of these little pieces of art, even among people who would never purchase a piano or celluloid glasses. Said efficient mailing system was made possible by the profusion of railways, which also meant that items larger than letters or small parcels could be more easily shipped across the country. Enter the mail order catalog, a format perfected by the likes of Montgomery Ward, Sears, and FAO Schwartz. The earliest mail order catalogs resembled early trade cards and trade catalogs. No muss, no fuss, lists of items and prices. But by the 1890s, they had ballooned to over 500 pages in some cases, each highly illustrated and promising better deals than you could find at the general store. This example is from the 1920s. It is a winter catalog, so all of your sweaters and jackets and cozy hats, all for the low, low price of $1.69 or lower. Trade catalogs took to the mail as well, such as this fantastic book of perfume label samples that offered perfumers a bulk discount when placing a mail order. The rest, as they say, is history, until e-commerce threw a wrench into the whole thing. But that's the subject of another talk. So that's the short version. But why is so much of this material wound up at the Winterthur Library? To give you some context, here is a quick introduction to the place that I like to call Epcot for historians. Winterthur is the premier museum of American decorative arts. Its unparalleled collection of nearly 90,000 objects displayed in a magnificent 175-room house. Winterthur is also 1,000 acres of protected meadows, woodlands, ponds, and waterways, with 60 acres of garden. And finally, Winterthur is a library. The Winterthur Library is an internationally renowned independent academic research library dedicated to documenting, understanding, and engaging the artistic, cultural, social, and intellectual history of the Americas in a global context from the 17th to the 20th centuries. Winterthur was established as a museum, garden, and library by Henry Francis DuPont, the final private occupant of the house that now forms the bulk of the museum. The DuPont family is famous for their eponymous company, founded in 1802 by Eleuthère Irénée DuPont, also known as EI. EI established the outfit to develop land and produce gunpowder, and later generations shifted its focus to chemistry and the automotive world. Unlike some of his more industrially minded family members, Henry found himself drawn more towards agriculture, horticulture, and American material history, and he had the generational wealth and resources to create the collection of his dreams. He became one of the leading figures in the history of American decorative arts, and even helmed the First Lady's Fine Arts Committee, which oversaw restoration of the White House in 1961. As HF's collections grew, he began to open up his home to fellow collectors, as well as people who wanted to research the history of American decorative art. In 1951, he converted the main house on the Winterthur grounds into a full-time public museum and moved to a smaller home on the property. In 1952, HF established a joint master's degree program in American material culture with the University of Delaware with the help of curator Charles F. Montgomery. The Winterthur Library was established the same year, with the heart of the collection expanded and curated by Frank Summer, the first Winterthur librarian. Henry Francis DuPont passed away in 1969. Winterthur is located just outside of Wilmington, Delaware, on a plot of land that has been owned by the DuPont family since 1811. The main house was constructed between 1839 and 1842 at the behest of Jacques-Antoine Biederman, EI's business partner and husband of Evelina Gabrielle DuPont. Biederman named the estate Winterthur after his ancestral home in Switzerland. The DuPonts own most of the land in this region for generations. In fact, with other DuPont historical sites in the area, including Hagley, which encompasses the original DuPont gunpowder mill, Longwood Gardens, and the Nemours estate. Winterthur is both part of the city of Wilmington and its own community. Some members of staff reside in housing on the property, and we even have our own zip code and post office. Our collecting areas overlap frequently with the other DuPont properties, particularly Hagley, and we both have very strong collections of trade literature. So if you are looking for trade lit, check out Winterthur, but also don't forget Hagley. The library's roots go back to Pierre Samuel DuPont, the progenitor of the American DuPonts, who brought a large portion of his library with him when he emigrated from France to the US in the 18th century. But the collection's strengths today are due in large part to H.F. DuPont and his vision for an advanced study program in the decorative arts. The library's modern foundations lay in H.F.'s careful planning. He recognized the need for a scholarly research library that would support a graduate program in material culture and connoisseurship, providing cultural understanding and the context to the study of objects in the museum, and to support students in the newly conceived graduate program in early American culture. The early collecting foundations laid by DuPont were taken up by Frank Summer and Charles Montgomery in the 50s, and succeeding generations of collecting librarians thereafter, resulting in what today is recognized as one of the strongest collections for the study of American decorative arts, material culture, and everyday life in America from the 1600s to the 20th century. I think our collection ranges all the way up through the 90s now, with the recent acquisition of, get this, Book of Paper Dolls of Martha Stewart. So we collect a little bit of everything that relates to the socio-cultural history of Americans. But let's rewind a tiny bit. In 1951, Frank Summer was a 28-year-old newly minted professor establishing himself at the University of Delaware, boasting degrees in archaeology from Yale and Cambridge. It was there that he caught the eye of Charles F. Montgomery, who was then Winterthur's associate curator and executive secretary. Montgomery was simultaneously engaged in opening Winterthur as a public museum and in building the graduate program with Delaware, so he tapped Summer to help expand the Winterthur's book collection to one befitting the research needs of master students. I can't stop looking at this image and cringing that the board is unsupported there. I actually have been meaning to look back at this book and try to figure out what exactly that title is and find it in the stacks. It's wonderful to have this much institutional memory recorded visually. Summer became Montgomery's book hound, spending the summer of 1952 in Europe, purchasing high points of decorative arts at post-World War II prices. In an August 1952 letter to Montgomery, Summer remarked that he was deliciously wallowing in books. The course next term should be a humdinger if I can do my materials justice. After several weeks of frantic letters back and forth across the Atlantic, granting Summer permission to purchase some title or another, Montgomery, with HF's support, granted Summer the equivalent of a blank check, this wire stating that he could purchase books to his heart's desire. Summer's background in archaeology is the puzzle piece that ultimately led to the Winterthur Library's remarkable collection of trade literature. He understood that collecting high points, while important to establishing the foundation of a course about decorative arts and material culture, only preserved a narrow part of history. It would be like excavating King Tut's tomb and only paying attention to the sarcophagus and burial mask, ignoring the rest of the amazing material that gives us a glimpse of the wider world in which he died. Summers' progressive thinking about more vernacular material, such as trade literature, meant that he was able to acquire it for a song long before most other institutions began collecting it seriously. Later in his career, he recalled a conversation with a librarian of a quote-unquote large and important rare book library, who, when told the kind of material Summer was actively acquiring, quipped, "Oh, reference material." Those that followed in Summer's footsteps continued to cultivate the library's collection of trade literature, particularly Richard McKinstry. While Summer laid the philosophical groundwork for Winterthur to seriously collect trade material, McKinstry made it one of the world's best collections. In his 40-year tenure at the library, McKinstry brought in thousands of pieces of ephemeral trade material, even aside from purchasing and shepherding the donations of a huge amount of other related items. His professional fascination with ephemera brought the Grossman collection to the Winterthur Library, a world-class collection of ephemera in and of itself, including hundreds of pieces of advertising and sales paraphernalia. And our collection continues to expand to this day. One of my favorite recent purchases is this sales sample book of Czech glass from the Jablonec Company, produced in the 1950s. But why do we collect trade literature? To better contextualize history. It provides valuable evidence of exactly what was for sale at a given moment, documents what was common and what was rare, cheap and costly, popular and on the decline. It gives us a glimpse into historical advertising and the distribution of products and labor. But another enduring research avenue lies slightly below the surface. It provides insight into the pursuits, interests, and lives of the people of the past. Illustration of goods depict specific objects, but they also inform our understanding of changes in artistic taste. Price lists record how much business is charged for tools, but also tell us something about the economic conditions of their times. Trade literature also captures the broader cultural milieu in which this commerce was taking place, from which we are able to infer societal values and concepts of desirability of both large groups and narrower communities. The range of research uses for trade material is even broader than the wide variety of products they offer for sale. But another reason we collect trade literature is for its artistic value. The Grossman collection was not built as a collection of trade material, despite its strengths in it. It was built as a design resource for John Grossman's stationery and giftware company, which was wildly successful in the 1990s. And while it is actively used for more traditional research, it is perhaps most frequently used by artists, makers, and creators to inform aesthetics and techniques. This is true of all the trade material at the Winterthur Library. Its visual appeal persists for centuries after the audiences it was created for have shuffled off this mortal coil. An additional research value hides in plain sight: the material the trade literature is made of. In their very forms, they tell the story of the development of print technology and book production, and who their target customers were. Conservation scientists from several fields have analyzed elements in inks and fibers in textile samples to reveal fascinating information about our chemical past. And book historians have examined marks of provenance to understand how trade literature was used and the professional networks in which it circulated. Some of these discoveries have been startling. For example, the use of arsenic green pigments in these labels for linen and corsets. You've been seeing images of some of the Winterthur Library's collection of trade literature throughout this presentation, but I wanted to highlight 3 of my favorite pieces, with the caveat that, given the sheer amount of cool stuff in our collection, my favorites fluctuate fairly regularly. I could very easily just choose 3 sales sample catalogs to highlight, but I wanted to give a real overview of the variety inherent to trade material. So without further ado, first, I would like to highlight one of the treasures of the Winterthur Library, the so-called French Peddlers catalog from sometime between 1806 and 1813, acquired by Frank Summer in 1964. Despite the very specific name, it is unlikely that these books were carried by itinerant French salespeople. We have 2 volumes of what once was a 4-volume set. The other 2 volumes, as of today, are still missing out there in the market somewhere. The quality of both the products and the books themselves makes them more likely to have been kept on the counter of a merchant consortium located in Paris. The 2 volumes contain over 1,565 watercolor illustrations, painted by hand of a vast array of goods, from garters to guns to toys to thermometers to house slippers. They document the types of product available to the middle class during the Napoleonic period, and are an invaluable insight into the everyday decorative arts of the time. Although Richard McKinstry did a deep research dive into the volumes in 2002, they still remain a bit of a mystery. Who exactly manufactured these items, and where exactly were they sold? Thanks to trade labels pasted into both volumes, we do know that the person who bound them was a stationer named Leboeuf, who operated on Rue Bourg-l'Abbé in what is now the 3rd arrondissement in Paris. And by tracing Leboeuf's business records, along with clues in the watercolors themselves, McKinstry was able to confidently date the book between 1806 and 1813, whereas Summer could only speculate on a time period. That's the research power of trade literature. And just a couple more images from this fantastic set. This has been digitized, and I will talk a little bit more about Winterthur's digital collection coming up soon. But this is Leboeuf's trade label saying that he sells paper and other books and stationery. My second selection is a little bit of Christmas in July, a 1913 sales sample book of primarily Christmas wrapping paper. I came across this book when I was contacted by someone writing about the history of wrapping paper. Hallmark has long claimed to be the inventor of patterned wrapping paper in 1917, spinning a story about having ordered too many envelope liners and getting creative with their overstock. But this sales sample book blows the case wide open. Not only was patterned wrapping paper being produced at least 5 years before Hallmark claims, the patterns are pretty sophisticated. This catalog was produced by Charles W. Williams and Company, a New York-based paper producer and importer that was founded in 1895. It contains not just patterned Christmas wrapping paper, but a variety of other delightful designs, such as I believe these are chrysanthemums and roses. They're also metallic in some cases. Wrapping paper is the ephemeral of the ephemeral. It is literally made to be used once, then ripped off and discarded. But because this is a sample book, we get a sense not just of what presents looked like in 1913, but of how the paper felt. It's somewhat heavier than stuff we buy today. This kind of experiential research is an important aspect of how sales sample books preserve history. I will admit I am pulling a bit of a fast one on you with my final favorite. This is a trade card, yes, but it's also a little bit of a sales sample. I'll use any excuse to talk more about sales samples. Anyway, this is a circa 1818 trade card from a British company called Erling's Lace, located in London. At first glance, it looks like a fairly normal early 19th century trade card with an engraved illustration of the building where Erling plied his trade. But on display in the front window of the engraved building are real samples of lace and thread. Erling compares common lace, which he declares to be full of fiber, and his lace, which is smoother and free from fiber. Cutting out the window and adding the samples would have been done by hand after the card was printed. You can see evidence of this on the back of the card, where the samples are secured with 2 strips of bluish paper. Erling was perhaps a bit ambitious in the number of trade cards he ordered and finished in 1818. On the front of the card, it bears an applied notice about the shop being relocated in 1820. He notes that his new premises will be larger, which makes sense. Machine-made lace was becoming more feasible to produce in this period, and business was booming. This card actually used to be a bifold, with a second page in which Erling went into more detail about his superior lace and spoke specifically to women customers. It is unclear why the Winterthur Library's copy of this card lacks the second page, but it is thanks to the wide network of trade literature and ephemera collectors that we are able to learn more. I will end my talk with an advertisement of my own. If you liked what you saw, come on down to Winterthur. All of these materials are available to consult in person for any type of research or just simple interest. You can find a selection of our trade material digitized on our Content DM page, although we're in the process of shifting everything over to a better platform called Cortex. You can get to our digital collection via this link at the top of our catalog, which will be updated when our new platform goes live. The digitized books include the French Peddlers catalog, as well as other pieces of trade literature that just didn't fit into this presentation. There are some truly fantastic pattern books and trade cards and promotional calendars and all sorts of fascinating things in there. And as you can see, you can access our catalog Wintercat online as well. Feel free to reach out to reference@winterthur.org or to me directly if you have any questions about our trade literature or any of our other collections. Thank you for joining me this evening, and thanks again to Kevin for reaching out.
I'm back. I was here the whole time. Yes, everyone. So grab those emails off of your screen now before we stop the screen share, so you can see our faces really big on your device there. So reference@winterthur.org and aalvis@winterthur.org are 2 contacts. I'm also going to put in the chat more information about how to get to you, your webpage and your podcasts and all of your background and experience while we get to our talk here. I'm going to start by just saying thank you for doing this. I'm so glad I reached out to you and you were really interested in speaking to a book club audience. This was so interesting and so fascinating, and the collection is so cool. I know you only showed us very little bits of it, but how much fun you must have going through the collection and looking at things that you've not seen before, or if new things come in.
Pulling material to take pictures for this talk was so much fun. I had read about the early American trade catalog printed by that Loyalist bookseller, but I hadn't ever, taken it out and actually handled it. So I'm very interested in the sort of materiality of books and the experiential nature of working with these things. So to hold it in my hands and sort of feel the roughness of the paper and the brownness of the interior, and it's just a fascinating testament to the sort of scarcity in which booksellers and printers in early America were operating in.
I will say that Christine just put something fun in the chat. You have to come and play in the collection. Thanks for doing this. I am first in line to come out and spend the day with you in the collection. It looks amazing. And I will, I also loved you mentioned it earlier on, the idea of collecting as archaeology, right? In the collection, that really kind of resonated with me in terms of how you look at the collection or how others are looking at the collection. And you said all kinds of people come to see the collection, but is it really the general public who are coming to curious, or is it researchers? Is it students? Like, who are really scheduling time in the library?
It really is a little bit of everyone. We
Hmm.
have a very active resident fellowship program. So that includes people like future PhDs, postdocs, researchers who are working on books or papers or really anything. But it also includes a specific fellowship for makers and creators.
Mhm.
So this is a fellowship set aside for artists to come and use the collection of library material as well as the museum and the garden to create something. And it doesn't really matter what. We've had maker creators write plays and music and paint and throw pottery. And we actually have a spectacular exhibition on at the moment in the main gallery of the museum called Transformations, which highlights a lot of the material that these maker creators have made in response to working with the collection. And it's really amazing to be surrounded by all of this art, knowing that it came from Winterthur, and sort of connecting those dots of like, oh, yeah, I see where they got that. So if you're ever in the area, that is on, I think, until January. So yeah, come on down.
Let's stop the share. So I think they got. Oh, look, before you stop it, someone asked about.
I know, yeah, somebody had a question about this.
Somebody asked about the decorative papers that are in this slide. So it's great that you're in this slide.
Yeah.
And maybe tell us a little bit about, are you systematically, I think, collecting decorative paper samples like the ones we see here?
So yes, we actually are sort of actively doing that sort of collecting. We have a great established collection of this sort of material already. I can't remember the exact name of the person who collected it initially, but it was a conservator. And she collected samples of different paper weights, different colors, many, many different marbled paper sample books. It is amazing, and I love that collection so much. But the book in the background of this slide is actually a new acquisition. It is decorated box papers from 1935, I think. So it has that like really sharp 30s aesthetic to it. And it's actually there are two sides of the sample. So this is just one side. The other side has a bit more pattern going on, but it was a bit busy. Not that this isn't. But I just love these. It's so satisfying to look at the different layers of paper, and it's interesting, you know, the different textures that were available now that this stuff was being produced purely with machines. You know, back in the days of paste paper and block printed paper, this would all have to be done by hand. And by the 30s, you can get these incredibly complex patterns on huge pieces of paper. So it really speaks to the technological development going on here.
God, I forgot which question I was going to ask next. Oh, I know it has to do with the collecting. So you're actively collecting items like this. So how are you collecting? Are you going out to auction? Are you soliciting items? Like that's part one of my question. The second part of the question is, how many librarians are there? What's the staff like at Winterthur? And you're just one person, right? And there's probably many other areas of collecting interest. So tell us a little bit about how that works. How are you requiring materials?
Yeah, so a very large part of my position as curator is specifically about acquiring materials, building the collection in new and meaningful ways in response to research interests and future research directions. And to do that, we go to book fairs, we speak directly with dealers, we cultivate donors. We have really great relationships with a lot of local folks who either donate their time or their material or funds to acquire additional books. That is also really ultimately how we wound up with the Grossman collection. That was a case of a relationship formed over time by Rich McKinstry, which brought that collection to us, which is a world-class ephemera collection that is just it feels bottomless. There are hundreds of thousands of postcards and labels and advertisements and boxes and Halloween decorations, and all of it's amazing is the thing. Like, none of it's bad. Like, it's all the high points of ephemera in like the best condition you've ever seen. They have an example of the very first Christmas card ever produced, which is cool.
Wow. Yeah.
So that's incredible. And we're very lucky to be supported in our acquisitions by funds left by HF DuPont, as well as funds sort of built over time by generous donations looking to support our work. But the other question about how many people work in the library, it is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8.
Wow.
8 people.
For what, 90,000 items? Is that what you mentioned
Oh
earlier?
no, over 1 million.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's crazy. That's crazy. You also answered the question about, well, obviously Summer had wonderful job with a blank check. You don't have a blank check there.
Unfortunately.
Buy whatever you want to buy. So that answered that question about how you're funded, the operations. You probably have some kind of endowment and some ongoing donor support. That's terrific. There's a question in here. I don't know if you're looking at the Q&A. I think you are, or in the chat. If there's anything you want to mention. I had the exact same question about the Martha Stewart paper doll collection.
So it's not really much. It's not like a bunch of a whole box of dolls of Martha Stewart. It's a publication from, I think, 1996, like when Martha Stewart was at the height of her power. And it's just like, dress up Martha Stewart, and it's like a little bit of a joke. So it's, Martha Stewart cooking and Martha Stewart gardening, and I think there's like Martha Stewart goes to war, and they're just, it's sort of a parody, and it's really kind of funny, and I think is a great portrayal of that sort of media personality that has been ubiquitous throughout the 20th century. We have joke publications about all kinds of figures in the early 20th century, so it works that there is this other one. But that's in the process of being cataloged because we don't know what call number to give it.
You can stop the share now if you like. I think we talked about this slide. I had that exact same question. Like, tell us more about that crazy new acquisition. And I think there's a very specific question in here that I'm going to ask before I ask a little bit about kind of specimen books and sample books, because I know that's a favorite area of yours, and I think it's a very popular, or people are interested in that in terms of a collecting area of interest. But let's see if you know anything about this one question from our friend Barbara about the works of Louis Prang.
Yes.
And are they represented in the collection, and what might you know about that?
Yes. So Louis Prang is a fantastic Louis Prang is a guy, but the Prang company was really instrumental in making excellent chromolithographs. They pioneered the sort of fine chromolithograph, and they produced that for advertisements as well as things like book illustrations. We have a great book that actually goes through, I think, an example of a chromolithographed piece of pottery that used over 30 stones to create that single image of a piece of pottery. It's so detailed. And I mean, you kind of take that for granted today, the sort of photographic reproduction. It's easy. It's, you snap a picture on your phone and you can zoom in and you can see all the details. But with chromolithography, and with that example in particular, as the colors are sort of building sequentially as you keep going through the book, these details come to the surface, and eventually you can see like the reflection of another building in the pot, and it's just incredible.
Wow.
Yeah, so we have a lot of Prang material. I'm actually developing an exhibit on color, and I'm including a couple of Prang books, some of the sort of instructive manuals on color theory and color schemes and things like that. So yes, very strong Prang holdings, one of our favorites.
Okay, so specimen books, sample books, some of your favorite things. They, as I mentioned, I think they are of interest to collectors, maybe new collectors. Tell us a little bit about I mean, they come in all different sizes, right? And all shapes, but some of them are quite large, right?
Yes.
If they're products that have, that's a large product, that's a sample. So maybe you can just tell us a little bit about some of the maybe unique ones or weird ones or maybe most rare ones that you might have. And if there's a story about how you got them or why they're so special, I think people would be interested in that.
One of my favorites is and sample book is very loosely defined here, because they're, like that sales sample card where it is a card, but it has samples on it. There's another one that we have that is a mason, a stonemason who works with marble, and it's a block of marble. It's a small piece of marble, but it has, the carved logo of the stonemason in it. And it's so funny to me. And I don't know why. I just imagine that guy handing out pieces of marble to potential customers. But, in the same way that you would go to a Home Depot and get a sample of carpet, I guess, but a little bit cooler. Another one that's fascinating and another one that is very loosely a book is a sort of box with 2 leaves. And when you open it, it is like 30 examples of brass handles. And it's the actual handles. It's not illustrations of the handles. It's from I think it's the early 20th century. So they were producing these things more cheaply, but still, it's you take out this box and you expect there to be a book in it, and it's full of handles. The sales sample books that have metal elements are always fascinating to me. I don't know why. We have an amazing one made of velvet with little buttons inside, little golden buttons. And that kind of leads me to the enormous number of trade sample books of textiles that the Winterthur Library has. You saw a peek of one, maybe 2 of them, of worsted cloth patterns. But we have, again, velvet. We have these incredible thick French sample books of velvet because, velvet is a thick fabric. So it's just like the colors are to die for. That's one of the amazing things about sample books. Like I mentioned with the wrapping paper, that it really preserves this stuff in ways that don't happen otherwise. I mean, if you make a dress out of velvet, that's going to be worn, even if it's only worn once and put in a closet, that's like some amount of wear. And it depends on how it's stored, if that closet is getting direct sunlight. But if it's in a book, 90% of the time or more, it's going to be closed. So you really get that richness of color in these sample books. Another weird one is something called the Scrimshaw sample book. Scrimshaw is it's a whale material. It's made out of whale tooth or whale bone. But this is not whale bone. It is some other kind of bone. But it is all of these little strips of bone with engravings on them. So it's in the Scrimshaw style of like a carving with sort of soot brushed into the indentations. But it's a very mysterious thing because, like, what was it advertising? What were people buying that's engraved on bone? Why would they do that rather than just print an engraving? So that's something that is, requires further research, and I would love it if someone came in and looked at that.
Yeah, I've heard of, well, I've heard of zippers, like a zipper sample book.
Mhm.
Someone was telling me about a barbed wire sample book.
Oh, I think I might have one of those actually.
Yeah, and once one person told me about that, then I started hearing about it all the time, and I'm like, oh, maybe it's not as rare as people think. So
I mean,
where can people go if they're interested in collecting these? So just like online auction, or like where would you suggest somebody who is interested in finding out more and seeing what's available in the sample book, specimen book market?
there are certain rare book dealers who specialize in ephemera and sample books and that sort of thing. There are a couple fairs actually for this material. There is the Allentown Paper Fair in
Mm.
Pennsylvania, which happens twice a year. There's the Ephemera Fair, which happens up in, I can't remember where it is now. It's up like in Connecticut, maybe.
Yeah, New England area. Yeah.
I've been once and it was like a very busy time for me, so I don't even remember driving there. I just remember the stuff, which if you go to one of these fairs, you will be overwhelmed. Like bring water and a snack because there is some incredible stuff to be found. I would check out also the ABAA website, the Antiquarian Booksellers Association of America. That is a sort of professional organization where booksellers are listed, and they also have their specialties available. So you can actually find a bookseller near you. Oh, Old Greenwich, Connecticut. I was right with Connecticut. It's not a very big state. Thank
Thanks,
you, Russell. And the ephemera dealers at the Ephemera Society show are incredible. And the other thing is, it's not just a place to buy ephemera, it's a place to hear people talk about ephemera. They have this really great roster of speakers who describe sort of the finer points of very specific aspects of ephemera collecting, like paper fans and particular postcard creators. So it really gives you an insight into the wider field of collecting as well as the narrower parts of it, to sort of help you get an idea of where you might want to go if you start collecting it yourself.
Yeah, Bruce also chimed in about Greenwich, Connecticut. I know he's state ephemera guy. So thanks for sharing that, Bruce, as well. We're at the top of the hour, so I just want to get a couple of quick questions in here before we wrap up. One was a question about who else has big collections of the same kinds of things, maybe not the exact same things that you have, trade literature, other ephemera in this area.
Hagley. Hagley is a very, very strong collection, in some ways stronger than us. But but I think we both have our strengths. And ours is, I mean, trade ephemera is very visual by nature. So we collect it particularly from that visual arts side, that decorative arts, visual representation. Hagley has a lot. We also have a lot of business records and things like that, but Hagley kind of specializes in business records and that sort of record keeping material of businesses. So Hagley is great. The Smithsonian libraries, yeah, business history, our stuff is prettier. I don't know, I think it's all pretty. But the Smithsonian libraries also have a very strong trade catalog collection. I forget how many thousands they have. But it is the library of the American History Museum that has strong trade holdings. I'm trying to think of other trade collections in the area, and even not in the area. Yeah, if anybody else wants to chime in.
Yeah, if anyone else knows of any and you want to throw it up in the chat, now's the time to do that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think we've got most of the questions in here. I'll send all of these to you afterwards as well. So if there's something we missed that you do want to answer.
Library company, yes, thank you, Russell.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, Irina, I saw your very specific question about billboards. We actually do have books about this material of billboard ads, and also how to paint billboard ads,
Mm.
and the kinds of things that appear on billboard ads. So I would suggest hitting up our catalog to find what we have in terms of that. But obviously they sort of increased with the appearance of cars. So there's a lot more people on the road. They have a lot more people to advertise to. So all of a sudden billboards become an art form. And of course they used to be painted by hand, just like other large format signs, because you couldn't print that large. So the books that describe how to compose a billboard and paint a billboard are very fascinating. A couple more other people chiming in with other good trade material collections. Of course, the Huntington, NYPL, I think they have a big one too. So yeah, there are quite a few very good collections around, because there's so much of this stuff. And there's so many avenues through which you can access it, you know, from a decorative arts point of view, from a business history point of view, from a local history point of view. There's just, you know, there's a lot of ways to look at it and a lot of things it can tell you.
We're gonna wrap up. Two quick little questions. You briefly mentioned stuff that you have on exhibit. So do you exhibit stuff from your collection there at the museum, or elsewhere? Does some of it travel and go to other locations?
Yes, so we have a library exhibit space, which is relatively small. It's three sort of wall-mounted cases, but that's where my color exhibition is going to be going in September. But the big exhibition that's on right now, Transformations, is in the main museum gallery space. So it is all about the Maker Creator Fellows and artists who have gotten a creative perspective on the material in the library and the museum. So there are a few library items as part of that exhibit. One of my favorite parts of it is at the very end. They have this incredible magnet wall where you can create your own collage album.
Mm.
That's one of the highlighted objects in the exhibit, is this sort of paper house that each page is a different room. So the curator and exhibit designers actually made all of these little magnets of cut out ephemera and chairs and pictures and beds and stuff, and you can make your own scrap album, and it's so cute. I love
That's
that
cool. Yeah.
aspect.
Great. Is there anything you want to share that you didn't get a chance to say before we wrap up? Now would be a great time.
I felt bad I didn't actually answer the second half of your first question, which is who uses the library.
Yeah.
And it's not just fellows and it's not just students. Lots of artists and just interested parties come in and use the collection.
Mhm.
We have a lot of tattoo artists actually using the collection
That's
recently, which
cool.
thrills me as someone with tattoos of book stuff. So it's great to sort of see people interpreting the sort of older school material into these really creative avant-garde things, and it's very energizing to see that sort of thing. But we also have kids that come in.
Mm.
We have a healthy K through 12 education program. So one of our key philosophies at the Winterthur Library is access and openness. So anybody can use the library, and everybody does, which is great.
I did feel like you answered it. Maybe now you've answered it in more specific detail because you didn't mention the education program, but I did feel like you answered it. So don't feel like you didn't get it in there. I was satisfied. Well, thank you, Alexandra. This was great. We really appreciate you spending your evening with us here for this Book Club of California program. So thank you.
Thank you. It was wonderful to be here. Thank you all for coming. And thank you, Diane. Yeah, the Oriental ceramic art. Yes, please come and see them, Diane. They are amazing, and yay, Hagley.
Well, and then everyone else out there, please join us for our next virtual program, which will be Monday, August 12th at 5 o'clock. It's titled Black Woman on Board, Claudia Hampton at the California State University and the Fight to Save Affirmative Action. So a good California history program for you after this terrific book arts program. Our speaker will be Dr. Donna J. Nichol, Associate Dean, College of Liberal Arts at California State University in Long Beach. So that's again Monday, August 12th. You can register for that event online at bccbooks.org/programs or using the link in any of the emails that you're probably getting from the book club now about our calendar of events. So thank you everyone for joining us. Thank you, Alexandra Alvis, for speaking to us this evening. I hope everyone has a wonderful evening. Be well and take care of yourselves. Thank you.